All right. Well. Welcome, everybody, to Pej's Recovery Corner. Today, we're going to go live. We're going live right now. We're live. First and foremost, I'm here with my homeboy, Booboo Garcia. Welcome to the corner, Booboo.
Yeah, what up, nephew? Big Snoop Dogg. What's up, Hesh?
What's going on? So today, first and foremost, I want to give a quick shout out to my sister. Today's her birthday. We're not going to talk about how old because she'd still be staying young, like 20 something. She's 20 something, and I love you so much, Sheila. Happy birthday to you, and such an honor and a privilege to have my dear friend Boo Boo on the podcast today. We've been talking about doing this for a minute. Boo Boo. So first, the way this works is usually I love to hear about your background, where you were born, where you were raised, kind of what it was like, but and then we'll get into like other stuff too. I'll ask some questions, but so first and foremost, where are you from? Where are you from?
From Compton. No,
Where are you from?
I'm
Cool.
from San Pedro, California.
And where's San Pedro? Isn't that near Compton, kind of?
It's a bridge that divides us in Long Beach.
Okay. And you were born what in L.A.? Is that where you were born?
Yep.
Born and raised. Okay. And then what was it like growing up in San Pedro as a youngster?
Well, I loved it. I was very. It seems like it's a small town, and everything. Where everyone was pretty much connected. Everyone knew everybody from generations. From certain families that were from Pedro. We all grew up generations with each other. So.
Okay, so when you say generations, I mean, okay, San Pedro is an interesting city. Like don't you have to drive over a bridge to get there? Like it's kind of like its own little island.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah,
over there, I've been over to San Pedro, and like there's some good neighborhoods, but there's some bad neighborhoods too, right?
Yep. Just
Like
like anywhere
you
else.
you got some well-to-do people that live over on one side of town, and then you got like the hood, right?
Yep. The collective ego calls it the ghetto by the sea.
And it's my understanding that possibly like a lot of people that live over on that side in that area work as longshoremen, like in the boat
Yeah.
docks, bringing in all the cargo that comes from across the world.
Yep.
Okay.
My grandfather is a retired longshoreman. All my family, sister, uncles, et cetera, cousins.
Okay. Um, so as a youngster growing up, like what was it like growing up in your particular neighborhood? I mean, were you seeing how was it?
Um, I think I was on survival mode from the very beginning. To be honest, I came from a family that lived paycheck by paycheck. Welfare, food stamps, um, kind of a bad neighborhood, um, and but that became the norm for me. Survival mode and just the gangster world. My father was a gang member and my mother was as well. They called my dad Sad Sack and they called my mom Little Loca. So my dad was a big sack of sadness, and my mom was a little crazy.
How so? They
Well,
crazy. Like how so?
my mom, she'd walk me to school, and next she's fist fighting with somebody. My mom was sliced in the back over 50 times, and they didn't stab her because she was pregnant. My dad was shot 5 times on 2 different occasions. He was stabbed in the face, um, pretty much from the below his eye to the bottom of his, um, by his chin. So he did look like Scarface.
So I mean, as a youngster, you're seeing this stuff. These are the people these are your parents, right? So
Yeah,
you're just taking it all in. It becomes you're you're conditioned to thinking like you gotta follow in their footsteps, correct?
yeah. It's normal. It becomes a normal way of living.
Is
Uh,
there no way around it?
my little mind had no chance. It was molded a certain way through my environment. And for me, later as I go through the 12 steps and have a spiritual awakening, I realize an awakening is thinking broader than your environment. So
Right.
what I'm saying is, what drives the road will no longer drive you. I'm not driven by my environment anymore. I can think for myself and utilize that intuition.
Okay. So Was there drug use, alcohol use in front of you at a very, very young age?
Yes, I would open the door and watch everyone party in my hallway door. And we lived in a 1.5 bedroom apartment, with two of my sisters, and I would look at everyone partying. I would hear that song "White Lines" playing, from the '80s, really loud,
White
I seen
lines.
yep, and I seen everybody partying, and I thought that was life.
Right.
I remember certain men will walk in the room into the house, and the energy will change. And I remember whatever they have, I want. They had some respect from people, and I'll go use the restroom, and wake up in the middle of the night, and there's my family portrait on the laying on the countertop with some white lines on it. So I seen a lot of coke. I seen a lot of I seen my dad OD a few times.
OD on what, like heroin?
Yeah, when the ambulance came.
Does that mean obviously they were shooting it, right?
Yeah.
And did you actually did you
my
ever
dad
see your parents sticking a needle in their arms?
I never really did, but he had a peacock on his hand where they would hide the markings. So yeah, my dad was a heroin addict. My mom eventually got into crystal meth.
Yeah,
became a tweaker.
Right. And yeah, I remember those times. That was probably like what, the 80s?
Yeah, 80s.
Yep.
And what I would do is I would wake up, and I would play with the beer cans, the beer bottles, play with the little toy, which I find out it's a roach clip,
Right.
a little clip with the little joint on piece of the joint
Oh
on
yeah.
it.
Oh yeah. Sometimes it had a feather attached to it.
Yeah, with the feather.
With a feather.
So that'd be a little toy for me, so.
Okay. So obviously you lived in a neighborhood. How young were you? I mean, obviously probably at a very young age you were hanging out with the kids in the streets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you acclimated to the street life almost immediately. I mean, there's no way around it.
Yeah, well, I seen it. I was taught it. My dad would tell people I'm going to be the hardest gangbanger when I get older, and so that was pounded in my subconscious. So.
Right. So at what point were you? I mean, did you have to go through the traditional getting jumped in, like getting beat down by a group of the guys to make sure that you're like part of the hood, part of the gang?
Like I always talk in my talks, I put a friend request in the neighborhood and it wasn't on Facebook.
This is way before a friend request. This is
you get surrounded by 10 guys and they jump you. Yeah. They beat the crap out of you.
Do you remember that day?
Mm-hmm. I was with my friend Johnny, who passed away. He later died from addiction and alcoholism, and but we got jumped in together.
How old were you?
I was probably 13, 14.
Okay. So like before that, were you actively going to school? Were you learning? Were you screwing up in school at a very, very, very young age before joining the gang?
To be honest, let me see. I stopped doing schoolwork in elementary pretty much. Once I hit junior high school, I stopped doing work. I mean, I only went just to get people to ditch school, see what's going on, and stuff like that. Gather up a ditching party, and
like a kickback. Like
it was all fun and games for me. I didn't take school serious, and a lot of people try to help me because I was a really good athlete. Bill Wilson says something in the letters with Father Adele, and he says, "I always felt the least of God's creatures in my perverse heart, so I had to be the first at everything," and that was my experience, because I had to portray this superior, that I'm better than, and because deep down inside I felt inferior. So I had to be the best at everything. You tell me to play basketball, you're going to pick me first. You tell me to play baseball, I'm going to hit a home run with a broken leg. You tell me to play football, I'll be the star quarterback or receiver. But I had to be the first at everything. Or if you tell me to fight somebody, then I'm going to come out the winner. Even if the kid's bigger than me, then I will pull something out. And because I needed you to want to love me, because I felt not lovable. I felt like something was missing, and it's that traumatized persona that I was already developing from an early childhood.
Mm-hmm. And when people would, like, let's say you were in a gang and you'd see the oppositional gang, tell the truth, please. Just tell me, like, when you would see like some people coming up on you, Was there ever any fear in you, or was it just straight up like, I'm down for my hood, I'm down for my shit, I'm gonna go fuck these dudes up, like I'm not afraid, or was the fear ever there?
Of course, there's fear. At least for me, there was. Because I'm hiding behind a persona now, right? And I got to do things I don't want to do. I'm afraid, but I need to do it because I don't want you to think I'm a chump, I'm a coward, I'm a loser, and I can't show you how I really feel inside.
Right. I mean, if
So
you're perceived as a chump amongst your homies, then they're gonna be like, what the fuck, right? They're gonna get on your case.
Tupac wrote a song called Bomb First. So I developed a habit. And this is even before Tupac started really getting even into that song, that I had a bomb first. There's no talking. You
Right.
gotta hit first.
Right. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Or
And there's no
you might
rules.
get hit and then you're going down,
And
right?
there's no rules. Yeah.
Yeah. So during that time, obviously, I mean, you're a few years younger than me, but I remember that era. That era, there was a lot of gangster rap. We loved it. We listened to it. I still love listening to that. I mean, they told me when I first got sober that I got to change like the style of music that I listen to. I'm like, I ain't fucking gonna stop listening to gangster rap. I love that shit. Like I grew up on that. I know it glorifies the gang life. It glorifies using and drinking and all that. But obviously, during that time, getting alcohol and weed was just a way of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were you doing that at a very young age? Like, what would you remember your first time that you actually drank or used?
Yeah, I do. Well, the first time I took a sip of alcohol, I spit it out, and I couldn't comprehend how people can drink this stuff. It's nasty, right? And I was around 8 years old. But as I got into seventh, eighth grade, summer, um, I was at a house party, and those little red cups, and they were pumping from that keg, filling them up.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, there's that stuff my mom and dad drank that I tasted, and it was nasty.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came across my way, I grabbed it and I just guzzled it. And they gave me another one. I guzzled it because I didn't want to taste it, but I wanted to pound it because I wanted to be a part of. And I don't want you guys.
Yeah, you didn't want to be a chump.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So
you got to fit in.
But what I did experience the effects produced by alcohol. That's spiritus contra spiritum. The spirit against spirits, as Carl Jung talked about, in that spiritual malady, which really is caused through trauma, went away. It went away, and I no longer, I didn't get taller. Pimples didn't fall off or nothing like that. That's other people's experience. But what happened for me was I stopped really caring, and I stopped hating, my mother and father. Don't you know? As a matter of fact, I use their names in the streets. Don't you know who they are? So
because they were known on the streets. Here, Aaron has a question. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you. Booboo, did you know at the time you were hiding, or did that awareness come later?
That awareness came later because it was all unconscious in the very beginning.
Right. So within time, obviously, how long were you out there doing what you were doing?
It was a way of living. I don't know how long it was, but
well, okay. So
until I hit like my early 30s, that's when I woke up.
So early 30s.
Yeah.
And you obviously weren't really into education because you said in grade school you were done then. So any kind of trade or did you learn? You didn't do longshoreman work, right?
No, I couldn't because I was always never had a valid license, or something was always cropping up where I couldn't get in. Mm-hmm. Early in the old days, you could come in as an unidentified, but after a while they started to change it, and it was harder to get in. But I became a carpenter and I started working. Got good at what I did and started working for myself.
Oh, we know somebody else who's a carpenter that's a mystic. Jesus.
Well, they say he was a carpenter, but I don't know. The lost years say something else. So.
Well, we could get into that in just a little bit. So this is before we jump ahead, though. Obviously, you became a carpenter in your 30s? Because before that, you witnessed some shit that really spun your wheels, right?
No, I've always done carpentry work since I stopped going to high school.
Just to make ends meet and all that.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were working at a young age, obviously, to try to make some money, right?
Yep.
Well, you were still gangbanging and everything. And what was didn't something happen one time, like something crazy?
A lot of things happened, a lot of crazy stuff, you know. I mean, like I said, you know, I didn't know as a man thinketh in his mind, so was he, you know. And
Mhm.
you're hearing this gangster rap, death row records, and they're talking about drive-bys
Yeah.
and money holes and you know all that other stuff, and we're living that stuff, you know. And we're because I'm feeding that into what's that saying? There's a evil wolf and a good wolf, the Native American saying,
Yes.
inside all of us, and the one you feed the most is the one that gets bigger. And that evil wolf was really, you know, big. He goes swole, you know, and he was obese, and I kept feeding that negative stuff, and I kept living it.
Hmm. So what then? What then happened?
And it just continued and continued and continued, and I started to have a little bit of moments of clarity here and there. I remember one day I was walking out. Two guys were going to fight, and I went outside to make sure this guy doesn't get jumped. And I ended up fighting two guys, right, one after the other. And I walked back into the bar, and I see my buddy who left to the military when we were younger, and I haven't seen him. He was in town visiting. He was like, "Bobo, is that you?" He goes, "You're still doing that same stuff since we were younger." And I realized, like, damn, like I haven't grown up, you know. Or my grandma like saying, you know, because the police are knocking down her door looking for me for a questioning, you know, out of all the my grandchildren, you're the one that's going to kill me. You know, little stuff like that started to help me wake up,
There was
along
little signs, little
along with losing
indicators.
everything. You know, because Eckhart Tolle says in the beginning of all addiction is pain, and the end of all addiction is pain. And Bill Wilson says, you know, the common denominator of spiritual experience is pain and utter hopelessness. And I was in a lot of pain by the time I would get to Alcoholics Anonymous or, you know, the 12-step programs.
So today's topic is trauma and the philosophies in recovery. So I want to get into that in a second because obviously it sounds like there was a lot of trauma that was already happening for you at a very young age, you know, and people some people label it as PTSD, some people just call it a way of life, and then you learn from it and you move on to transforming and changing your mentality, your understanding of certain things. I too had some indicators, a series of events that happened for me to where I realized, like, why am I living this lifestyle? Like, this is kind of aimless. Like, where am I going with all this, right? So I was wondering, uh, when during that time, like, you know, up until your 30s, was it just alcohol? Was it weed? Was there pills? Was there cocaine? Was there meth, heroin? Were you not doing the type of drugs that your parents were doing?
You know, yeah, I didn't want to do heroin because my dad did heroin.
And you
And
would, because
I didn't want
you
to do
saw that.
crystal meth because my mom did crystal meth, you know. Yeah, I seen that eventually, you know, later as I got older, it was pretty clear, you know. But yeah, I drank, and my drinking progressed from just beers to hard liquor, and then, of course, weed was always involved in
Right.
smoking, going through the smoking primo stage, um, and then of pills. You know, I think pills really helped me um, hit my bottom. To be honest,
Were you a ghostwriter for any of these rap groups that we know
no,
of? What earlier when I asked you, you started actually flowing. What were you? Go for it. Do it.
no, I'm good. I'm
Come on,
good.
don't be shy.
No,
Don't trip.
no,
Will you
I'm
do it
good.
in private time? Pretend like there's nobody here. Nobody's watching. Come on, do it. I got you on video. I'll put that shit on my Facebook.
I'm good.
Okay. So then you know, obviously something must have happened to put you on the path of recovery, but before that, did you did something, like, you witnessed something crazy that happened? I remember you talk about this often. It was in a car. Somebody that you were in a car with. You want to talk about that?
um, yeah, well, I shared in my story a lot of how, you know, we meet these girls, make a long story short, last call for alcohol, after party, go buy liquor after hours at a liquor store. And we get our liquor, get in the cars, and these guys start saying stuff. They're playing that death row music, you know, the gangster rap. And I get out of the car. Well, I wanted to walk up to these dudes, but my buddy grabbed my shoulder and says, "Let's get out of here. We don't got a strap. We got these females. We're in a different neighborhood. Let's get the hell out of here." You're right. We get in the cars, we take off, and well, before that, the girl switched seats with my buddy sitting shotgun, and he goes with the girls, and she comes with us, and we're at the red light, and these guys start throwing stuff, and I get out that car and I walk towards these dudes, because I don't know, I always was driven by anger, which is a form of fear, right? And I didn't know how to think about consequences, or maybe I need a pause or call my sponsor. I didn't know how to, do any of that stuff because I was driven by fear. And I didn't know that at the time, but I just know I'm going to walk up to the first guy and drop him. I don't think about how many guys there are. They may have guns, different neighborhood. Anger just drives me, and
Right.
I walk up to these guys and they pull out straps and start shooting. And as tough as I thought I was, I end up running back towards the cars because I don't want to get shot. And that girl gets shot right in the head. Yeah.
The girl got shot in the head.
Yeah, right in the temple.
Because she had switched seats and now she's sitting in a shotgun and they shot her.
Yeah. And I lied because she knew my girl at the time. And if I would have told her the truth, then she wouldn't have came. So that really hurt me later as I started to become more conscious, because I pushed it down for a long time.
Okay, so when you say it hurt you later, you mean like that night and the next day, in knowing that she got shot, did you feel any way of sorts? Like, were you sad about this?
Yeah, but I pushed it down. I don't like to feel things, so I push it down.
What were you pushing it down? Like alcohol, drugs?
And pills. Yeah.
Pills. What kind of pills did you used to use?
I used back in the day a lot of Vicodin and Norcos.
Okay,
I would use that to drink, and then Oxycontin a little bit. Yeah.
So when that happened, how old were you?
I was in my 20s.
Okay. So
early 20s.
And how old were you when you got sober?
32.
Okay, so between that time and your 30s, what happened? Were you just continually gangbanging and working and drinking and using? Was that just a way of life up until your 30s?
It was just a way of life until I lost everything. There's a saying in Alcoholics Anonymous: alcohol gave me wings to fly, but my alcoholism took away the sky. And that's exactly what happened.
Okay, so then you said until I lost everything. What happened? You lost everything, like you were homeless?
Yeah, I became homeless.
How did that happen?
Living out of a bag. Everything just fell to pieces. I don't know.
Why, were you fucked up? Like you couldn't just function?
I couldn't function. I was shaking. I remember my last days, my buddy was in a rehab, and he reached out to his brother, and he let me stay in his apartment for the last couple months until he got out. But I was sitting in that apartment, and I had to drink. I had to get loaded. I needed to relieve me from the bondage of self, right? Mm-hmm. And I would play that song Cry by Jay-Z over and over and just be sad and hurt and just drink because I lost everything that gave me a sense of self, everything that was worthwhile in my life, everything that was important. It was stripped away. And when I say from my alcoholism, from my own making, I can't blame it on a disease because it's not a disease.
I like that you bring that up because we've talked about that extensively. We'll get into that in a second. But so you said you were staying at the dude's house. Now, did that end? Like, did he say you got to go, or is that where you ended up deciding to change your life?
Yeah, my last night drinking, it was November 13th in 2009. And, a couple of days before that, I put a 38 to my head. And I couldn't do it because I seen my daughter's eyes, right? But, I promised I was going to go back to my neighborhood. I was going to stay, in Torrance and drink where people really don't know me, and I don't have to watch my back as much, And, I get drunk. And once I drink, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm off and running like Forrest Gump. And, but I get back to my neighborhood and there's a party and start talking crap. I always talk about when I'm drunk, I think I'm Bruce Lee, Boy George, and Tupac all put together, and I'm just messing around with the Boy George part. No, I'm just messing around with the Boy George. No, but I have a big mouth like Tupac, and I think I'm Bruce Lee, and I'm willing to fight anybody, and even if I get my butt whipped. But I don't even think about that, because I'm driven by fear. I'm just scared, really, but I pretend I'm tough, and I've been in a lot of fights, and a lot of violence. But that night, someone got shot, and it wasn't me, But I woke up and I was just tired. And I said, if there's a F in God, help me or take me because I can't do this anymore.
Okay, so you woke up where? On the
I
street?
woke up in my buddy's apartment. And he let me stay on until he got out of his rehab because he
Okay.
found out I was homeless.
So you weren't you didn't go through a traditional detox or the Beacon House or sober living or treatment or anything like that, right?
No, thank God.
Okay. Stop. So but you did go, I mean, if you were on pills and stuff, did you detox on your own? Like did you go through the pain of
Yeah, I did. I did. I was in a lot of pain.
just
I
cold
had the
turkey?
shakes. Yeah, it was hard.
So you and alcohol too, like
Hmm.
that's deadly, man. To
Yeah.
be detoxed, like would not be
I didn't
detox.
know anything. I didn't know anything before because I never even heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. I never heard of recovery, any of that stuff. It was all new to me. So
Okay.
so yeah, like nowadays everyone knows about taking someone to recovery. I never had any friends. They were all tweakers and drug addicts and alcoholics, and I
Mhm.
never even heard of them going to rehabs except prison.
It's interesting because I relate to the fact that you grew up in the gang life, a gangster mentality is like we're the best, our neighborhood tops your neighborhood, you can't fade us, like don't fuck with us. And then to be like to have that grandiose like egoic upbringing where you just think you're the shit, like you don't mess with us, right? And to be able to see the transition through a lifestyle that you think is going to serve you well, and seeing other people have gone off to like the military and they've changed their lives, or they're questioning you like, really, dude, like you're still doing this shit, but to the point where you become homeless and lose everything and you're just broken, like just totally broken, like you don't know what the fuck else to do. And to not even go through like, I mean, I know in that area down there's the Beacon House and there's certain places that are the end of the road, like the last house on the block. But what then inspired you or made you, from all of your brokenness, decide to turn it around? Like what was your drive? Like what happened there?
Well, to rewind it really quick, the reason why I said thank God that I didn't go to those places is because maybe I wouldn't have got it. I think the way I found it, and I can't speak for everyone, just for me, it is exactly the way I needed to find it at the time, where I can hear the message and do the deal, right? I don't know if someone, but I don't know. I think I was just in a lot of pain, and those three jewels of Alcoholics Anonymous became present, and I grabbed them and utilized them, which is willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness, which was caused through a lot of pain and suffering.
Right. So okay, so then you got sober. You was it obviously was just through a 12-step process, like a 12-step community, correct?
Yeah, I found some structured groups, and I found some friends that I knew from the streets that were really doing the deal. They weren't just cheerleaders, but they were actually active members of the fellowship.
Okay, so
And
these were ex gangsters that got sober.
yeah, my friend Javier was one. And he was an older cat. He was like your age, and you're older. But no, he was just an active gangbanger and respected in the streets for all the wrong reasons, right? Or all the right reasons in that way of thinking. He was a gunner. He didn't mess around. You don't want to look at him too long, And he's laughing and giggling, eating cookies at an AA meeting. And my thinking at the time was, did he snitch on somebody? He's a
Ah,
punk,
like a
because
sellout. Like
yeah,
how are you
yeah.
gonna?
Hmm.
What are you, straight edge now after you're supposed to represent the hood? But of course, that's that same egoic conditioned
Thinking,
thinking.
yeah.
Now this is what I wanted to ask you. You told me earlier that you had a pretty much an elementary school uh, education, right? Like you never really advanced past that. So is it fair to say that you were illiterate? Like you didn't know how to read?
Yeah, I had a hard time reading, and anything I could read, I couldn't comprehend.
All right. So you had a hard time reading. You could comprehend. What do you mean? Like, well, what were you trying to read? Were you in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous? Is that what somebody was trying to help take you through?
Oh yeah, that's the first book I've ever read, cover to
That's the
cover.
first book. So
It's actually
you
the only book I've ever read cover to cover, to be honest.
that's bullshit. You read a lot of books since then. I
Yeah,
know
but I
that.
never read them cover to cover.
Okay, but here's the thing that gets me. Like you gotta admit, like that the literature in Alcoholics Anonymous is like some folklore. Like some parts of that's like some folklore, like Shakespearean style of writings, and then on top of that, like during that time, like in the early 30s, like you had the way that Bill and others wrote it is like they use words that we don't even fucking use anymore, like cocksureness or whoopee parties and shit like that. And so here you are, an illiterate man, that your first book that you learn is fucking that book of all books. But what I really like is the fact that you didn't just read it, but you got the essence of it very early on, because I met you when you had like 4 years of sobriety, and
it was 3.
it was 3 years of
Yeah.
sobriety, and
3.5.
you weren't to me, you weren't robotic. Like when you talked recovery, what I really liked about you is that you would incorporate much of your upbringing or the things that influenced you, like anything from Tupac to the newfound stuff that you've been reading, like Eckhart Tolle, and you would like kind of just incorporate all of that stuff together into your story and base it around a lot of the 12-step lingo, let alone it was your style of talking. That was the first thing that attracted me to you, because I was like, who the fuck is this gangster with the tattoos on his neck that's wearing a 3-piece suit that's coming? Like, what's he got to tell us here today, right? Like, he looks like he's about to still go out and gangbang. So I judged you, right? But almost immediately, once I heard you start to talk, I was like, oh, well, we got to be friends. Like, this guy's dope as fuck. So when you got into that book, obviously you went through the process of the steps, and that what did that do for you?
Well, thank God for people in the fellowship, because they really helped me understand what stuff meant, because I didn't understand what it meant, right? But then when they would explain stuff to me, I didn't get caught up in the wording so much, but I heard the principle behind it all, right? So it's not so much the wording, but the principles behind it. And I was able to, I was just able to see that and utilize those principles, and which started to make sense for me.
Okay, so I'm going to actually ask the question in a second, because my friend Michael just asked. Here, I'll just put it on the screen so you can see it. You guys like Sadhguru, and we'll get into that, because I know you already know who that is, because you've. So after the big book, you started to, now that you learned how to read, you started to read a lot of other stuff. I know that you love reading, like you study many schools of thought, a lot of spirituality. But I think something really special happened for you, that you and I went to the meditation gardens where that Yogananda had started up in LA. It was in the Palisades. And while we were there, like, we had these deep conversations, because I think you and I were vibing right away, because you knew I love Rumi, I love mysticism, I love mystics, and you had already like studied extensively many different schools of thought, many mystics, many philosophers. And I want to know, didn't you say like something just came to you, like like you had almost seen it in a dream? Can you expand on that, please?
I don't really talk about this much, especially in the rooms, but since you brought it up, Sadhguru and Sri is another one. There's some great mystics. I love those guys. But it's like the mystics started to come to me from like my first year of sobriety. Everything just started to come. Yogananda was one who started to speak to me in spirit and guide me. He was a guide for me. I never knew who this guy was. He'd come in dreams, his face. I started to hear his name, and I didn't put 2 and 2 together at first. And everywhere I go, I'd hear Yogananda, and I started to get into his teachings and find out who this guy is. And so I had a lot of guidance with Yogananda.
So it was kind of like a 6 degrees of separation for a person that's deceased, but he's really not deceased because his spirit was still alive. But I think we've also talked about the fact that even Yogananda, and it's not like all humans don't have an ego. Even Yogananda had a bit of an ego, but he did start a tremendously powerful movement. I mean, he's got 3 different centers, or he started 3 different centers in Southern California.
Well, the ego is the human experience, right? We won't have the human experience without it. But also, there's no such thing as death. I think that's an illusion.
That's an illusion.
How can you kill God if God is within us and is our true essence, right? Spirit.
Right. And did you ever actually start believing in God or higher power, or you choose not to call it God? Was that through the process of recovery, or through your readings, or do you even believe?
Well, I started to believe in a power, right? In the source of life, the all, right? as Toth would call it. But yeah, God has kind of been a misused word, and it becomes like a mental image for a lot of people because it's been conditioned a certain way. But it's really the self-realization that Yogananda taught, that in order to experience your oneness with the all, we're all connected.
So is it safe to say, at least based off of your belief system, that God is within us? God is, we are God?
We are God. There's a saying: if you don't become the water, you'll always be seasick. And then the Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh always says, enlightenment for the wave is realization. You are water, not the wave. Or Jesus said, I and my Father are one, which is just wording that he used in his culture, right? Father.
Mm-hmm. And with
At the time.
with no mud, you can't have a lotus.
Yeah, no mud, no lotus. So all that stuff helped me wake up to my true essence. The Gnostic Christians talked about forgetfulness is the root of ignorance, and I forgot who I was because trauma is a loss of self. The origin of the word trauma in Greek is a wound, and I was hurt. Behind all addiction is pain and hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Trauma. But for most cases, for all cases, there's some pain underneath it.
So if trauma is the loss of self, does that mean, do you believe that, well, obviously much of humanity has experienced some kind of trauma in their life.
Oh yeah.
Some is sexual trauma, some is verbal, physical trauma. Perceived trauma. Do you believe that all humanity can work through their trauma? If they've lost themselves, they can find themselves, correct?
Yeah. Because who we really are is so powerful, it's beyond the mind. Just like God is beyond the mind. I don't know if that makes sense. But like I've had some deep spiritual experiences that I realized that, and it's all beyond the mental, the conditioned thinking. It's beyond that. It's pure consciousness.
Okay, so then with that mental condition thinking, which we often talk about, right? We often talk about this. This is a learned behavior because people are just raised a certain way, so they think a certain way, and that's just what they believe, correct?
Well, that's why they say alcoholism or addiction runs in my family. Mm-hmm. Like, is it your genes or is it your beliefs? Epigenetics will tell us it's our beliefs. The biology of belief. What's it called? Came out with Bruce Lipton, one of my favorite doctors, Dr. Bruce Lipton, in mystics, because he is a mystic. He's a spiritual scientist, I call him. Mm-hmm. And he came up with a beautiful book called The Biology of Belief, and he talks about how addiction and disease. And a lot of these great doctors, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Gabor Mate, who's like our Silkworth of today, but I think that's actually an understatement. And no disrespect to Silkworth, but Gabor, they all say it's not a disease.
Okay, so let's take that back to Alcoholics Anonymous. This is an 80-some-odd-year-old program. I mean, it was based off of a book that Bill wrote when he was, 3 years sober, I believe?
Yes, and he was very spiritually immature at the time. And I'm not disrespecting Bill because he would agree with me. Bill had so much to grow, but what he was dope at and what I really respect is he put those universal principles that you'll find in Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism, mm-hmm. or even the Emerald Tablets from Thoth, the Egyptian god, the Great mm-hmm. Atlantean, and all these. He put those together, and we taught us how to utilize them. Science and spirituality are have to go together. Mm-hmm. They're not separate, because science can now break down in depth how our mind and body heal itself when we live on a spiritual basis. So science without spirituality is incomplete, and spirituality without science is ignorance. We got to learn, put them together.
Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper now. This is something that I've been wanting to talk to you about on this podcast for quite some time, because we have a lot of conversations, and we're allowed to have these conversations, I think, due to the fact that we're free thinkers and free spirits, and we've also studied the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. Let me tell you, like when I first got sober, I sat in my rehab's counselor's office. He was this little Persian guy, my little Persian Yoda Sia, and on the wall he had a picture of these two old guys. I'm like, who's the old guys? Who's the old white guys, right? He said, well, that's Bill and Bob. These are the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm like, so why do you have them on the wall? And he goes, because they saved my life. I'm like, how'd they save your life? What are you talking about? Like, I thought you were an NA guy. He goes, well, you don't understand. Like, they started AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and then it, you know, other things branched out, other different movements, other different groups, other 12-step groups like Narcotics Anonymous came from it, Cocaine Anonymous, Heroin Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, all these anonymous, Sex Anonymous. So I was like, so why? I mean, why on your wall though? Because they mean a lot to me, because they were good people. They basically saved a lot of lives. They started something that saved a lot of lives. So in the time that I've known you, I know that you had moved to Ohio a few years ago, and it was kind of alarming to me because I thought, why would you like want to leave Los Angeles and go live in like a cold, dreary state like Ohio? Not that I would even know, because I'd never been to Ohio. I just assumed, right? And then when you had moved there, I actually came out and visited you, and we went. You took me and showed me pretty much the history of AA come to life. Like, we went to Dr. Bob's house, and for those that don't know, obviously it wasn't just Bill Wilson; it was Dr. Bob Smith too. That was a proctologist, right? And Bill was a stockbroker, but Bill wasn't doing too good financially. This is during the Great Depression and all that stuff. He was drinking, and then he got sober, and then he met Dr. Bob. He took me to the Mayflower Hotel, where Bill was actually contemplating drinking again, and he saw the people at the bar, but instead he called Henrietta Sieberling, and he called somebody else to put him in touch with Henrietta Sieberling, who at the time had a house, and she provided the space to have Bob and Bill come and meet together in a room, which you and I went and sat in. We also went to the hospital where Sister Ignatia was working with the alcoholics in the alcohol ward, and she would give out the medallions. And we, you took me all over. We went to the actual place where Dr. Bob was, where there was a portrait of him, and I think Ebby Thatcher's Bible was actually still there. So this is during this time when these two guys collaborated.
Bill Dotson.
Huh?
Bill
Was it Bill
Dotson's
Dotson?
Bible.
Okay, yeah. When these two guys collaborated and met, one of them had a very Christian background. The other one studied from the Oxford group, and or actually was turned on to the Oxford group's the steps that they provided, which were just 6 steps, but he then expanded on it, which would be Bill Wilson. But was the egoic thinking, do you think, like taking form even during that time in Alcoholics Anonymous, or were these guys, when they were trying to put it all together? Because we went into Dr. Bob's house and we saw the books that they were using during that time to put together the big book, like Varieties of Religious Experiences by William James, or Carl Jung. They were working with Carl Jung to be able to get he was a psychiatrist, correct?
Yes.
And they were basically they were trying to make this thing be appealing to all alcoholics, not just a limited amount, correct?
I think in the very beginning, it was a certain group,
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, women were considered sluts if they came into the rooms. So it wasn't really open.
Didn't Dr. Bob not want women in Alcoholics Anonymous in the beginning?
I think they all did. That was just the collective thinking at the time. But thank God that they were able to think greater than their environment. Bill Wilson and Bob eventually. I mean, because if it was up to the Akron people, they didn't want that big book to come out because they already found a solution. They were happy with the Oxford group in many ways,
Okay. So with that said, let's talk about Bill and Bob's trauma. Did the founders of the 12-step community of AA, to your knowledge from your studies or what you've learned, did they have trauma?
Yeah, of course. Well, if you look at, Bill says we realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us, right? So, and it doesn't talk about that in the big book. But yeah, Bill Wilson at a young age, lost his childhood sweetheart that he thought he was going to marry and he was in love with. Principal comes up to him and says that she died, and he had abandonment issues. His mom sat down with him and his sister and said, your father left us, and then next, she leaves out to college, and becomes one of the first women to graduate from Harvard, I believe, but and then he felt abandoned. He didn't felt lovable, right? I told you earlier, he felt the least of God's creatures, so he had to be the first at everything, And but so he experienced some traumas, and he experienced some war and so on. We don't know what else he experienced. Well, I don't.
Yeah.
But and then you look at Dr. Bob, and he looks like comes from a perfect home. But then his daughter writes in the Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, Sue, and she says, her mother blamed his mother for his rough upbringing, for his alcoholism, the reason why he became an alcoholic. So there's some perceived trauma there. There's developmental trauma through Dr. Bob, and there's obvious trauma through Bill Wilson. Trauma is trauma, and what it does is it gives you the loss of self. That equilibrium's thrown out of whack. You start to live in that threatened homeostasis state, right? Where unrest is irritable and discontent, and trauma gets you trapped in the past. So all my responses are not in the present moment. It's a response from the past.
So, and obviously, I think that when you say that about Bill having the abandonment issues, even when he was drinking in excess, not just during time of loss, for example, financial loss, but also in celebratory senses. So drinking was just a way of life. He was numbing to not feel, or to feel good, to feel inebriated, because he loved the effect that was produced by alcohol. But obviously, when I talk about the abandonment issues, probably carried on into his marriage, because he didn't want Lois to leave him. And of course, she was a bit of a codependent, right? Lois was his wife, and she would stick by his side, and she knew him better than when she could take care of him. Then when he got well, then she didn't know how to deal with that, which in turn made her have to create something new, and that would be Al-Anon, which saves a lot of people's lives, a lot of families, because it shows them how to deal with their newfound sober loved one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well,
why the philosophies? When you say the philosophies of recovery, example. Okay, let me ask this question. You got sober in a group of people that were carrying the original message, and they also, I want to say this in a respectful way. They also had a movement, or have a movement still to this day, where when people go there, they're asked to dress a certain way. And I noticed that when they also share in a general way, but they do also share their story in a way to where it sounds very similar, right? It sounds very similar. I think there's some rigidity, and some would see it as dogmatic, even in other 12-step movements, not just in that area, but nationally. And I know even internationally, there are people that follow that school of thought, that style of sharing, that style of being, where there's they're really big on the singleness of purpose. And there's a lot of old timers that do not want to hear drug talk in AA meetings. So I think that when people are overly rigid, and they are dogmatic, they kind of scare people away from wanting to really be part of that fellowship. Is that correct? Are they creating new trauma?
yes, and yes. I believe, once it becomes rigid and strict, it becomes a religion. And unfortunately, it has become a religion. Just like that self-realization fellowship that Yogananda started has become a religion. That's kind of the human nature with movements. Christianity, it's a religion, right?
Right.
You become really dogmatic, and egoic becomes a part of your egoic identity, which it's supposed to be a spiritual movement. If there was a spiritual movement, we wouldn't have to need to protect anything. We just got to live in truth and be authentic. But as far as when we're carrying a message through a generalized construct, it's very limited to who it's going to help. And yes, it's helped a lot of people, but how much more can it help if we become less rigid and we start to let go of some customs and do like a inventory within collectively, not just individually, And what can we do? Because alcoholism is addiction, period. There's no, it's not separate from addicts. It's just a different substance. And the big book's pretty
Right. If
clear.
you're drinking daily, if you're a daily drinker or an hourly drinker or a minute by minute drinker, you're addicted to alcohol.
Yeah.
So
And,
it's an addiction.
addiction is a response to trauma or pain or hurt, right? So it's a normal human response to that suffering, that pain. Mm-hmm. So we use that stuff, and then what happens is we become addicted to what it does for us, because trauma is not what happened to you; it's what happened within you, mm-hmm. and we're wounded inside, which creates what Bill calls a spiritual malady, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm never really a defective character. I'm suffering from some habits and thought patterns that are not really working anymore. They're throwing me off alignment from my true self, and in harmony with the all, right? So I think that willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness must continue for us, including with the old timers, and be more open to, because when it was written, the book, it was written to a specific society at a certain right. time. Right. It should be a reflection of society, and we're not in that society anymore.
So 17 years after the big book was written, I think it was about that time when Bill then wrote the 12 and 12, and he broke down the steps in a whole other, something like that. And at that time, it's my understanding, perhaps, maybe I'm wrong, that Bill was going through some depression. He had a different, he was more advanced in his thought process. Do you think when he was writing the 12 and 12, he was trying to explain the steps in a more psychological way and kind of sprinkling spirituality within it? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, he had, what made him irk a little bit was, and he talks about this in some of his talks. I know there's one in Texas. He gave a talk, and I forgot what year it is, but he talks about when they talk about the AA Bible. He says we early AAs were far from biblical, right? And it kind of bothered him. So he wanted to. I read up on some stuff, and says where he wanted to write that 12 and 12, so we don't have so stuck in worshiping the big book, word for word, But also he wanted to get those 12 traditions out. So it's really,
which the traditions were obsolete when in the beginning. There were
no. I believe it was a little skimpy. Yeah, it was called the 12 points of sure future, right? Mm-hmm. In the very beginning, but it was a little skimpy, so he thought he would write the 12 steps, a new outlook on them. So many years later, 15 years later or so. So he did that. He also had the help of Father Ed Dowling on his side, especially with steps 6 and 7. Tom Powers, Betty Love, or editors and maybe ghostwriters of the book, because he was in depression.
So, he was in a depression.
Yeah. But, people say, well, Bill said this, yeah, but how long ago did he say that? Would he say that in 2021? Bill was always about growing and expanding and finding new ways to help people suffering, alcoholics who are suffering, And
so, if I'm not mistaken, Bill didn't want people to go out and share Bill's experience. He wanted people to have their own experience.
Yes.
Because a lot of people look to him as the founder, the saint of this organization. He started it, and since Bill Wilson said it, we got to do it. Now, when Bill originally wrote the big book, do you think that Spirit of the Universe was kind of riding through him because it was so divine?
I think the collective conscious was really in need of this to manifest, and it was already trying to manifest. I mean, Carl Jung was pretty close. He already understood alcoholism or addiction. But Bill just didn't write it by himself. There was a lot of people.
There was a few people that wrote the big book. Yeah, it was a few people.
Yeah.
Right. But Bill, kind of the embodiment, the majority was written by Bill. And then also, I mean, obviously there's that other book that came out.
In the group conscience. I'm forgetting his name right now for some reason.
Harry, isn't it Harry?
No, I'm thinking of someone else, but I'm blank right now with the history.
There's that other book that came out a couple of years ago that's called Writing the Big Book, that actually
Hank P.
Hank P. That's what it was.
No. It just came to me. Hank P. If it wasn't for Hank P, we probably wouldn't have a big book because he was really pushing Bill to get this thing done. And Hank had all kinds of ideas too that didn't go in the book, but he did write the employers, right? Because he was in corporate America.
And even some other parts of the book, I heard. Like,
yeah, he helped. A lot of them helped. It wasn't just Bill alone. The group conscience did help.
And that the book that came out a couple of years ago, Writing the Big Book, actually specifies and tells you some of the stuff that is in the book that actually didn't all happen certain ways. For example, Ebby's meeting with Bill.
Yeah, and what I like about Bill is he was more concerned about principle versus facts, actual facts. So the way it went down with Ebby, from Ebby's point of view, remember Ebby was sober and Bill wasn't, it didn't go down that way. But it was kind of boring. So if I read the way they met, there's no principle behind it. But the way Bill put it, he got his soul to that message. Like if I would have read in the big book the way Ebby's version is, I probably wouldn't hear a message with depth and weight to give me hope. I love the acronym of HOPE, help other people evolve. And when I heard Bill's story, the way Bill wrote it, because he was a great salesman, he sold me to the message. So I'm grateful that he didn't focus on the facts. It was really more about principle.
I love that. Okay, so you had your experience with living in Ohio for a while, then you ended up moving to Arizona. But while you were in Ohio, you had done something that you told me about. You had you linked up with a psychic.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that before you linked up with a psychic, did you believe in psychics? Did you think that they were real or they can actually like perform some kind of when I was a kid, ever since I was a kid, I always felt like a little mystic. I always had something in me, that divine spark, activated. And God is everything, or else God is nothing, right? And I believe there's only one spirit. But what was the purpose of getting the psychic? The original purpose?
Well, when I went to Bill's house in Stepping Stones, I seen some UFO stuff, and then I seen the guide started telling me about the spook room.
This is in New York.
Pass it on. Yeah,
this was in New York. And it's in AA literature, and Pass It On. They talk about the spook room.
Chapter 16. You can read chapter 16. It'll give you more information on the spook group that developed. And when Bill was living with Dr. Bob, and his wife.
What were they doing as in the spook group?
Were
they fucking around with the Ouija board
boards,
or what?
Yeah. They were seekers. So they went through every route, they can find, every path to find truth, and I wanted to tap into Bill and with a good psychic. And I did that with a group of people, a small group of people. And Bill came.
Was this during the same era or time possibly that Bill experimented with LSD, or was this before?
This is when he went to live with Dr. Bob when he was freaking brand new, when he got him sober, helped get him sober. So, and Lois writes that in her letters. She don't know who got who into who. They weren't just reading biblical verses. They were all into some other stuff as well. The
spook group.
Yeah, and Bill talks about being able to see dead people, or
I see dead people.
Well, he was helped them transition. And it's in that
chapter 16. A lot of people 16. Don't talk about this stuff in AA. They would never. I don't even think they read Pass It On, or I don't think they read these books.
Yeah, he was an awesome individual. But when I had that psychic reading, Bill popped up with Father Adeling, and who else?
Wait, back up. The psychic reading, the purpose was, didn't you want to talk to your dad in that? Is that right?
No, I did one specifically for Bill Wilson.
Okay, so you got with the psychic.
Mm-hmm.
Was it alone, or was there a group of people there?
There was a small group.
And this was a group of people from Ohio did you tell them, like, we're going to be meeting with a psychic to tap into Bill Wilson?
Yeah.
Did any of them, were they like reluctant to going, or were they doubtful, or did they think this is a joke, or were they just not even saying it so you didn't know where their heads were at?
The ones that attended were serious.
Okay. So you attended with this group of people, and when in having this psychic Bill Wilson, the psychic wasn't a member of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Had no idea of the history. I mean, most people don't even know who Father Ed Dowling is in the fellowship. And for her to be able to describe him in depth, Father Adele, and show, Father Adele suffered from pain, you know, his whole life,
More
and
trauma.
yeah, and so for one thing he said is that he stretched his body out, showing that he was in no more pain, physical pain anymore. So that was pretty interesting. That was a key, thing, because it talks about it. If you read The Souls of Sponsorship, he talks a lot about his physical pain he was suffering from.
I have a lot of physical pain in my back right now. I think you do too sometimes. This shit that happens when we get older. Okay, so in the time, do you mind talking about real quick? We have a few minutes left, but I want to know, being with the psychic and bringing Father Ed Dowling, but more importantly, bringing Bill. What did Bill say?
Well, I'll tell you one question. I asked him about singleness or purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I asked him what one thing he regrets or would change in his writings, and he said the singleness of purpose, because it's not about the alcohol or the drugs. It's about to get the people to love themselves again.
Bill said this
Yeah.
in this
Well,
session.
in the guy in psychic,
Through the guide,
channeling,
through the
channeling,
psychic.
yeah, through the channeling, yeah.
So you asked the question about the singleness, or what would you do to change? And she, the psychic, it's a female, the lady?
Yeah. Well, I think label consciousness is ego consciousness, right? At large. And what happens is, if they don't fit the label, we kick them out all the time, or we become really dogmatic. They're not an alcoholic. Addiction is addiction. I mean, why else are we using the same 12 steps? You know what I mean? Because the real problem is the human condition. And we have to become at peace with that one more time, get past our past experiences, and get back to the present moment, because all my trauma responses, again, comes from past experiences. So I have to retrain my mind and body to live in the present moment.
So in short, what he was saying is singleness of purpose is kind of outdated. Make sure that Alcoholics Anonymous is applicable to all people that are suffering with any kind of addiction. It doesn't have to be specifically just alcohol. Because is that correct? Is that what basically what he was saying?
Yeah, but again, when you're in the spirit world, you're not in the conditioned state, right, that we're in the human experience. So you could probably see things in a lot broader from what we can in the human experience.
Absolutely, I understand that. I get what you're saying. That makes sense to me. And one of the things that I want to say is this: is to anyone that's listening. I don't even know how far this podcast will go if people listen this long, but this is very important to know that I see a lot of people that end up in AA that never even had a drink. Right now, however they're getting there, whoever's sending them, sometimes they're going through treatment centers and such. Some of them are not identifying as alcoholics because they've labeled themselves as an addict, and they want to let you know that they're an addict, which is their own conditioned thinking. But what I can't blame them, because they did drugs, they didn't drink. Like they go into AA meetings, and it's not their fault that they're in AA meetings. Someone's sending them there. Now, if an old timer happens to be there, they'll correct them. It's the chairperson's duty to let them know you need to identify correctly, or you can't share. If it's a closed meeting, even if it's an open meeting, like as long as your problem is related to alcohol, right? But what's really interesting to me is that like Cocaine Anonymous and Heroin Anonymous works straight out of the big book. Cocaine Anonymous has a book, but it's just hope, courage, and change, right? Or I think that's what it is. Yeah. But they don't have like, an actual step working guide. They go straight through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I would just hope that people in AA realize that these days you don't just have your traditional everyday straight up drunks in large amounts that are coming to AA. There's a lot of people that are coming with like crack problems and heroin problems and fentanyl problems, and by all means, like they should be welcome. I'm actually, very aware of certain groups that are so open to many different people with many different addictions and traumas that are coming to AA, that they open their doors and they let them come and work through their stuff through the 12-step process. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, Bill talks about Odin with those goofballs, and I think it's in Language of the Heart.
Yeah.
He has a whole little writing about taking someone else to the hospital, but he talks about it. But what was your question again? I'm sorry.
Basically, AA should be open to anybody
Oh,
that's got any kind of substance abuse problem, rather than shunning them. I mean, after all, doesn't it say in the literature that we don't pronounce anyone an alcoholic, and
yeah,
we let
exactly.
people diagnose themselves? So there could be some cat that's in the back of the room that's been doing fentanyl for 5 years, but may have drank when he was a teenager and drank alcoholically, or he may not have. He may never have even had one drop of alcohol in his mouth, but still, like, don't shun him. Like, don't push the guy out of the room. I know it's the
Well,
hand of AA's duty to like put him in the right meetings, but maybe he'll go to like Narcotics Anonymous and not like that group, and then what, he doesn't. Oh shoot, I lost him just when it was getting juicy. But I might have to wrap it up because we went over an hour. I see Jackie's. Oh, nice. I love what you said. I'm going to put this on the screen. I've been listening since the beginning. This has been such a great conversation. I have a friend who's not an alcoholic or addict, but loves going to open meetings with me. Completely agree with you. Anyone should be able to go to open meetings just to be able to experience what we do here. I may have lost Booboo. This was really good. For some reason, it logged off for him. But I'll just sign out and basically say this has been like one of the most fascinating and amazing podcasts that we've had as of yet, because Booboo and I are such dear friends. He's one of my best friends. We talk almost daily, and we go deep in conversations. We just have, like, we kind of share the same values, or similar values, and very meaningful conversations that are much deeper than surface level conversations that I would have with people that are just acquaintances or minimal friends. So what an awesome episode it was today. I love Booboo Garcia. I hope that anybody or everybody that was on here today got a little something out of it, if not a whole lot of something. And with that said, signing off. Over and out. Love you.